After I finished college in 1994 and before I started graduate school at Southern Illinois University Carbondale in 1995, I had a year that, people sometimes call a gap year or something like that. And I came down here to Milwaukee and lived about maybe 2 miles from where I currently live, maybe a mile and a half, in a little apartment, and worked 2 jobs, exercised a lot, worked on my languages and studying philosophy and applied to graduate school, and most importantly of all, saved a good bit of my paycheck every month. And I would go each month to this big bank that I had an account at, and I would change my money into various European currencies because I had planned to save up and fly over to Europe. I actually also went to Quebec after I got, out of my apartment and the lease and all that sort of stuff. And before I would go to graduate school, once I actually got accepted, I was going to spend about a month and a half traveling around Europe on what's called a Eurail pass, which meant that you could ride the trains, with certain limitations all over the place for a certain flat fee. I know it wouldn't give you like a sleeping compartment or anything like that. You'd have to pay extra for that, as I discovered. And I had a lot of various friends and acquaintances, even an old girlfriend from college in different places. In France, in Germany, in Switzerland. And so I knew there were people who I could stay with on the cheap, and the rest of it I figured I would go to youth hostels. And that's for the most part what I did. I also, in Paris, met a stranger on the train, got talking to him, and he turned out to have a very nice apartment that he was like, yeah, you can hang out with me for a couple days and, we'll check things out, and I'm busy, but you'll be on your own, and you can wander around the city and do what you want. So I traveled around a good bit. I flew into Frankfurt first, and I traveled to different parts of Germany, went to the Czech Republic, came down through Switzerland, and then I was in France, and then eventually I was in Paris. And by then, it was August, which meant that, the city was mostly overrun with foreigners. And in the summer, in France and actually in a lot of other countries, that's when people go on vacation. And so a lot of the residents of Paris wanted to get the hell out of there so they don't have to deal with all these goofy foreigners, and they can enjoy themselves in other parts of France. So the city was, busy, but busy in a different way than it had been just a month before or would be in the fall. And I stayed in Paris for, I want to say, about 4 or 5 days. And, I had a map of the Paris metro, which turned out to be not as helpful as I would like. I often had the idea, I'm going to go to this place over here. I'd get on the metro, and I would screw things up and wind up at a different place. And then I would just, I was a big walker, so I would walk around. It was warm, actually quite hot at the time, but I was used to it. And so for me, this was like a grand adventure. So we're now going to get to the part of the grand adventure that I want to zero in on and tell you about in this story. It's probably like the third or fourth day that I was there, and I had wanted originally to go to see the Louvre, the great museum of art and sculpture and all sorts of other cool stuff. But unfortunately, there had been a bombing on the Paris metro not that long before that. So they were searching everybody who was going to go into the Louvre. So when I got there, I saw this line that was like a mile long, mostly Japanese tourists, all waiting to have their stuff searched. And I was like, this is going to take forever. I'm not going to sit around here in an hour or two just to go into this museum where I'll only see a few things and I won't get to see the totality of it. And so I got back on the metro, And I'm not sure whether I just sort of like wrote it at random or whether I was trying to go somewhere. But I got off and, came up and started just walking around. And, there was always cool stuff to see. And eventually I walked for, I don't know, maybe a mile or so from the metro stop. And I ran into a place. And it looked kind of, not run down or anything, just kind of like there weren't a lot of people there. And I was like, well, it's hot. I'll go in there. It's probably cooler. And it looks like some sort of museum. It said Musée de l'Orangerie. Now, the Orangerie was a place originally for orange trees to be brought in during the winter to keep them, from being harmed by the snow and frost and cold winds and stuff like that. So I didn't really know what it was. I just saw, musée, museum, l'Orangerie, something to do with oranges. So I go and, there's a guy. And, I don't remember what it cost, but it was pretty cheap at the time. So I had French francs along because this is before the euro actually became a common currency across Europe. So I had, French francs, German marks, Swiss francs, what else? Some Czech money that we weren't actually supposed to take out of the country. And in any case, and some American dollars, of course, as well that I could exchange. And I think I had some traveler's checks perhaps too. So anyway, pay the, I don't know, whatever it was, 10, 15 francs or something like that. So at that time, the equivalent of like $2 or $3. And I go inside and I'm looking around. It's an art museum and it's one of my favorite kinds of art, impressionist art. And when I was in college, I did a lot of things with the art department, and I've been interested in art for a long time, and I always kind of gravitated towards the Impressionists because I love their use of color to, work certain effects of light and all of that. And, we get to see quite a few of their things here in the Milwaukee Art Museum, which I used to go to all the time when I was living in that year. I was a member, so I'd go in all the time. And I went downstairs, and then I discovered something that was, what a treat for me. Because of the Impressionists, the one that I liked the most, actually I'll even say loved his work, is Claude Monet. And especially the Waterlilies, right? Which you would open up an art book and you could see them, and you could buy prints of Claude Monet's Waterlilies and put them on your wall as a poster, or you could frame them and all that. And they would be sort of a rectangle, and you would see this stuff. You could look at the brushwork and be like, "Wow, this is just amazing stuff!" Right? I had no idea, because I was pretty uneducated, that the actual Waterlilies are long, long paintings and big. And guess where they were? In the Orangerie. And they were in these circular rooms where the paintings themselves were essentially murals that were affixed to the wall. And you could stand in the middle of the room or go closer to them and just be surrounded by each of these. So as opposed to having a rectangle that you could look at on the wall and be like, oh, cool, that's Claude Monet. That's part of the Waterlilies I hadn't seen before. You were immersed in this experience of looking at this wonderful artwork. I don't know how long I stayed there. And I must have looked pretty weird, I was at the time, not quite 25. I was going to turn 25. I think I actually turned 25 on the day I came back. So I was 24 years old. I had my hair dyed kind of auburn and shaved on the sides, long on top and in back. And, I was wearing a shirt with a tank top underneath and jeans and probably boots or something like that, as I was wandering around. And so I looked like kind of a weirdo. And now you got this guy just like looking around, not saying anything to anybody. It was a quiet place. It was a cool, quiet place, actually. And just like standing there, taking it all in. And that's, as far as like artwork goes, one of my favorite experiences. I'd love to go back again and spend some time doing that now that it's almost, 30 years later, right? It would really be quite wonderful to go there with my wife or my kids or whoever else and just to actually take this in again. And now, of course, I know that the Claude Monet's Waterlilies are these long rectangular compositions. I've gone online to the website for the Musée de l'Orangerie to look at them, but it's not quite the same as actually being there in the place. If I ever do get to Paris again, and I did get to Paris back in 2018, a good friend of mine who used to be a client and who's also a great benefactor. I was going to Stoicon 2018 in London where I was presenting, and he was supposed to be there, couldn't make it, but his mother and his secretary came, and he had arranged for all of us to go on a day trip to Paris. And, so kind of a whirlwind tour of doing all sorts of interesting things. And that was pretty amazing. And we did go to the Louvre. We sat outside the Orangerie, but we didn't go inside because it was close to the end of the day and we had to hop on the train to go back through the Channel underneath the English Channel and get back to London. But, what a beautiful place and what an amazing set of compositions those Waterlily 8 paintings turned out to be. And so I think backwards in memory about the experience of it, and not just what I saw, but what I felt at the time. I felt this sense of joy. I was, for the first time, seeing something that I'd known about but didn't know what its reality was. And the reality was so much greater than the facsimiles and portions that I'd had prior to that. So quite an experience, and I think, ahead, maybe I'll never get a chance to go back and see it. If so, my experience of it would just have to be what it was as a young man back then, enjoying, experiencing. But if I do get another chance to go back, I'm certainly going to take it in and spend as much time as I can looking at those wonderful paintings that Claude Monet bequeathed to all of us if we can just get there, right? So that's a story I thought that I might share with you. Moments, actually an afternoon of great enjoyment, of pleasure, of learning, of widening my horizons. Can't claim to be all that astute when it comes to art or well-read or whatever the equivalent of that is when it comes to artwork. But I do know my Monet, and I did get to see those Waterlilies in the Musée de l'Orangerie. So that is my story for you.